Just to start, Ray, in terms of background of the how did you get involved? What was the objective that was given to you? Can you let us know the background?
Yeah, I mean it's funny. Most people who sort of meet me now think of me as somebody who's, a political data person, and it's funny because I think of myself as a computer scientist, mostly because I spent a lot of time looking at data and applying it to these techniques to different areas. And so I've done a lot of work in retail and healthcare and intelligence and financial services, and I spent a long time doing that. So I spent about 10 years working at Accenture Research Lab, where we were really trying to take, we had a group that was focused on looking at these types of technologies and building out the next generation of them for different businesses. And it was great. I could do whatever I wanted. And I had a great team. And eventually I got tired of doing something that didn't really change anything for the average person. And between that time and when I left, the Obama campaign was setting up a few blocks from where I was. They talked to me about building a team that was really going to be very data-driven. It was a very top-down mandate of, we are going to be a very data-driven campaign. Now, that doesn't mean it's good or bad. Everybody wants to run a data-driven anything, right? Nobody's going to claim, I will run a gut-based company. But the good thing was they actually followed through on that. We got the budget to hire a team. We had about 50 analytics people in our team. We had about same amount of 50 engineers building, it wasn't just for analytics, but so overall we have about 100 and something people doing technology and data and analytics for an organization that was a few hundred people big. And so what our goal was to sort of, one, build a team from zero to what we got to, build an infrastructure from, it wasn't zero, but it was, it's like scale of 1 to 10, it was probably at 2, and we need to get it to at least 5 or 6. And it wasn't just build it and then use it, it was building and using it at the same time. So in terms of scale, eventually we ended up having about several million volunteers, a couple of million volunteers making phone calls and knocking on doors, about 120 million contacts, right? So we had to, in a way, enable these contacts. Where should they go? Who should they talk to? We had a mailing list of about between 10 and 20 million that we were sending email list. We were sending billions of emails. We sent about 5 billion emails. I mean, we had 3 objectives. We needed to get more Facebook fans than our competitor. We had, just kidding. If you read the media, that's what you would think, that more Facebook fans, it means more votes for some strange reason. So I think our objectives were, going back to your, having a very clear objective makes it very easy. And we were very lucky because most organizations don't have that single objective, right? Because you might have different objectives different times. Sometimes you're looking for revenue, sometimes you're looking for market share, sometimes you're looking for margin, sometimes you're
reducing churn and so on.
Right, so you have 7, 8 different goals and you're trying to kind of juggle them all. In our case, it was a very clear single objective, which made things relatively easy and focused, and if something wasn't achieving that goal, it wasn't worth doing. It was different. It's not something I was used to. Pressure, yes, but that kind of, as you said, a binary outcome where you either win or lose, and there is no next, you can't just, I'll build something and we can make it better. There's no making it better. It's this, and then it's all over after that. The good thing about that pressure was that people came together. One of the challenges we had was we had money at some point, but it was still not, so we weren't paying people very much, right? But we were able to get really good people for the amount of money we were paying because there was that sort of external pressure of this is something that they would want to do. The bad thing of having that pressure was that sometimes you struggled with, which every organization does, is what's good enough. Right? When do you stop building this particular product or tool or feature and move on to the next one because this is good enough and I need to now do these other 20 things that need to be done. The campaign was different departments, and each of the departments there was a team focused, a digital team, and it's probably the last time there'll be a digital team because the digital team did all sorts of things. So there's a digital team, there was a a TV ads and sort of paid media team. There was a finance, which was doing fundraising. There was a team, which is what's called the field, which is all the canvassing, and then a couple other comms and other teams. And so the way we were structured was that we had a core engineering team that was building an infrastructure. Then we had a core sort of modeling team that was building these predictive models for individuals across all these things. And then there were small teams that were basically interfaces with each of the departments. So they could take the work that we're doing and communicate to each department how basically they were embedded in those departments, and you could tell them how to use it, how to consume the results, how to understand what probability means. When we say somebody's 70% likely to vote for us, it doesn't mean they're mostly going to vote for us. It's either they vote for us or they don't. What does 70% mean? Most Americans, and probably most people in the world, don't understand what 70% really means in that case. So we spent a lot of time communicating what we did, how we did it, and how to consume our results to each of the departments in the campaign. And that was absolutely critical to our analysis being used somewhere, because it wasn't just about building these things. It was about working with them to actually get them to use it.
One of the key differences, I think, between Australia and the US, obviously in the US you don't have to vote, and I think one of the factors that you worked on was people's, I suppose, propensity to vote and whether you could persuade them to vote. Mm-hmm. Can you explain a bit more around that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, Americans in general are lazy, and especially around voting. So average about 50-something% of eligible voting age people in America vote. So any political campaign there, a major part of the work they do is getting people out to vote. It's not persuading them to like Obama. It's not talking about policies. It's just getting them to vote, because if you get them to vote, they will vote for you. Which is interesting, because when you're trying to get people engaged and enthusiastic about a candidate or about a product, for that matter, it's not necessarily just, it's harder to change their minds. It's much easier to just mobilize them. So if they're already like a particular candidate, or it's easier to get them just to go and vote than it is to persuade them to sort of change their mind about the candidate. So the bulk of the effort we spent is getting people to vote, which is a huge difference. There's a lot of hype around the one-to-one, and it wasn't the messaging that was one-to-one. It was, so we scaled using people, which is very rare today. You scale using computers, you don't scale using people. And our scaling was we had 2-point-something million volunteers. So we didn't have to do a message necessarily that was customized for each person. We learned that if we can get somebody who's really excited about us, if we can point them to the right person, they will take care of the messaging. We don't have to tell them what to tell that, because that person is their neighbor, it's their friend, it's somebody in their family. So all we have to do is tell them, here are 50 people you should talk to. So what we did do was we took every individual voter in the country and came up with 3 scores for them, 3 propensity scores. One was their propensity to support Obama. Second one was propensity to be persuaded to support Obama. And the third one was their propensity to vote. It doesn't matter which direction. And using those 3 scores, we could decide what we're doing with each person. Right? So if you imagine sort of the classic 2x2 grid, now if you think of people as very likely to support Obama and not likely to vote, then those people, you don't try to change their mind, you just get them to vote. Very likely so not likely to support Obama and likely to vote, you really don't do anything with them because it's too expensive to change their mind. You try to find the small sliver who are persuadable and try to change their mind instead of the whole set. If you take the other one, would be very likely to vote for Obama and very likely to vote. And those are people you don't want to tell them anything to do with voting or supporting Obama. They're excited, happy, engaged. They're going to do what they're going to do. you get them to be advocates for you and volunteer and donate money and get their friends and family and neighbors to do something. And then you have sort of people who are not likely to vote and not likely to support Obama. You just let them go. It's just that's 25% of the population, and you can't spend time. You don't have enough resources. So we did everything at an individual level, but then the messaging was more global. But we let the individuals who we would give give a list of people to go to these doors and knock on these doors and talk to them, and that's kind of how we scaled. When I first started working there, I started getting complaints from a lot of my friends, like, stop sending me emails, you guys are sending me too many emails. And in the beginning, I would just apologize and say, I'm sorry, I know it's starting to, I'm working on it, we just started. And so slowly I convinced people that let's start an experiment where we reduce the email we send, because we might be losing people, they're unsubscribing, they're getting less engaged. When we need them later on, they won't be around. And so we ran an experiment with a couple of million people where we sent some people half the emails we were sending and some people 0 for a period of time. And our hypothesis was that when you decrease this frequency, they start getting sort of more aware of when an email comes. And so when you bring them back up to normal later, they will make up for the lost money in the middle and then start giving more. Turns out we lost money in that experiment. People didn't give money during the experiment, but also didn't do anything afterwards. So then there's this painful moment where we're, okay, if reducing the frequency hurts us, we have to increase the frequency. So we ran an experiment where we started sending more emails, where we went with, and I mean, average, we probably sent about, a typical person would get, 3 to 4 emails, 3 emails a week, or about, somewhere around 15 to 20 a month, and that's a lot. So we started, okay, the setup of the experiment was, let's send that, and then we'll send at least 1 a day to some people, and then double what we were going to send otherwise. And so there's a lot of pushback from the people who are writing the emails. 1, we don't have time to write these emails. 2, this is really crazy. And my response was, well, we didn't magically know the right, so you were here, we reduced and it hurt. This is not a magic number, we need to go this way. So we pushed that way, and we started, turns out we were making a lot more money. For every single additional email we sent, we were making about a 15% more money on a given day, and if you're raising $1 billion, 15% could be a huge number. And even accounting for all sorts of acquisition cost and unsubscribe rates and lifetime value, we were making a few $100s for each incremental unsubscribe, which was 5-6x greater than our acquisition costs. So it made complete sense to just bombard people with emails. Now, lifetime value for us, it was a very different number than you guys care about. We don't really care about their life. We care about election day. But it turned out we never found we never got to the plateau. Right? Any experiment we did, it just kind of kept going up and up. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a danger in social media right now. Is a lot of people assume that is the entire world, and that whatever you do on social media reflects reality. And there's no evidence that that's true. When we were running the campaign, we had a lot of vendors, all these social media listing vendors that I'm sure you're all familiar with, sending us emails and calling us about, we can, we have this, and we can do this for you, we can do that for you. And all those were completely useless, because most of the voting population is not on Twitter, is not on Facebook. Especially the people you want to target. So one of the, social media is fairly anonymous. Twitter more so than Facebook, but even Facebook is fairly anonymous for any practical. I was talking to you yesterday, right, where if you have a Facebook page and people like you, those likes are completely useless. You don't even have a list of names of people who like you. So I think there's a danger in social media is you overreact to it without calibrating it in some way, right? You would never have done that in the old world where you're doing surveys. Be very careful, and I'm going to pick my sample, and and you would hire somebody who would, do your selection and try to figure out the right. And in social media, you just kind of like, whatever. 88% of people think this is great. I'm going to just go with it without looking at, who these people are. Are they customers already? Are they, do they purchase things from a competitor? How do they compare to the rest of my demographic? Am I targeting them in any other way? So we very much ignored input data coming in from social media, all the listening stuff. We looked at it. It was more of just keep watching it in case something goes crazy. But let's not do anything about it because that's not our target. We use social media much, much more as an advocacy tool. So more social networks. So Twitter we mostly ignored, we did some stuff. Facebook we really used to figure out how to reach people that we couldn't reach otherwise through other marketing channels, so direct mail and email and live TV and knocking on doors, and which is basically younger people. We were missing our engagement. Younger people was really low. We didn't have contact information from them. So what we did was we used social networks to take our supporters who cared about us and ask them to let us access their Facebook network, and then use that network to figure out who do we need to reach, and found the best person to talk to them. So we would take somebody who would come to us, would ask them for Facebook authorization to access their friend list, take that friend list and match it to our list of voters to figure out the propensity of voting and of supporting us and of being persuaded, and say, these are the 12 people who you need to target. And we would then ask them, these are the 12 people who we think you can influence and who are useful for this purpose. Can you share this message with them? And that was extremely successful because we were able to really reach these people that we had no other way of getting to. And the volunteers who were the ones who were doing this work, they wanted to help. They just didn't have if we gave them their entire friend list of 600, 800 people and said, can you message the people who you think might need to hear from us, that people would just cancel and they wouldn't convert. Whereas doing that, our sharing rate was ridiculously high, and also the conversion back from their friends was order of around 10%, which was much, much, much higher than any other way of reaching people individually through those networks. So we were really much more effective at using social networks as an advocacy channel than the listening tool.
Yeah, which I find really interesting because I think there's a lot of emphasis on the opposite.
Absolutely, because it's very easy to do. Anybody can build a product that takes tweets in and gives you random graphs. They're not random, but there's nothing you can do with them. You've got sentiment and you've got buzz and volume, and there'll be a word cloud somewhere that it looks pretty and it's a dashboard, so somebody can look at it and see what they're paying for. But because you need to justify what you just bought, right? And there are 100 vendors, they're all the same, they don't do anything interesting. And we've looked at all of them, and we decided it wasn't worth wasting our time. We needed to be more actionable, and none of those things, we couldn't really take any action.
A lot of companies have difficulty in connecting the systems to the people and to the business outcome that they're trying to achieve. How did you solve that in such a relatively short period of time, and with such an enormous, 2.5 million volunteers? How did you solve that challenge?
Well, we didn't really solve it. I think we had a workaround because we weren't looking for long-term. We weren't looking for a system that could run for the next 5 years or 10 years. We needed it just to work for that particular time. We just used lots of shortcuts. So instead of building this massive, integrated data warehouse with all these different things in there, what we did was we said, well, we're going to have these vendors running their own systems, and the teams inside the campaign will be using these vendor systems. So instead of trying to get them to switch to a new system and build new interfaces and build everything scratch, we'll let them use that. But we'll build a system that would grab everything from those things, put it into our central data warehouse ourselves, do all the analysis there, and then push the data back out to the systems. So we didn't want to touch anything that was going there because that would require training and getting people to learn new things and us building all this, the front end and everything. So what we would do is we would basically synchronize with all the databases, and then, for example, every night we would have a system where people would, they would use the system to pull a list of, so they would say, I have a volunteer, I have 10 volunteers in my office coming tomorrow, I need a list of 600 people to call. and they would go into the system and you know, just say 600, and it would give them a list. So what we would do every night is update our models and then score everybody in the voting population, and then take the scores and then push them back out into the system. So they didn't really need to know what was happening in the back, how this, what is it in their system, is it outside their system? They just had to pull a list, and it was there. Same for email. When the email team would send an email, they would say, oh, I need to send this email to 1 million people, and it's this kind of email. And they would just press the button, and all the stuff would happen in our sort of analytic system, but then pushed out to the email vendor that they were using. So I think the key was sort of integrating into the processes they were used to, integrating into the tools that they were using anyway, instead of trying to switch them. It wasn't efficient. I mean, I would have not have done that if it was if I had 5 years, but given a year, that was the most efficient way of it was a hack, but it was the most efficient way for us to get something done. No, I think, I mean, the majority of the work we did was really, I mean, you can call, I think, whatever word you use, manipulation, persuasion, influence, convince. We all do that every day with people we know around different issues. We try to convince people to do things that we think we agree with, and we want to convince our friends and neighbors and family to do that. I think what we were able to do was, it's very hard to get people to do what they really don't want to do, right? 46% of people don't vote. We couldn't get them to vote, whatever we did, right? So I think it's less, most of the work we did was really give them information, because that's all you can really do. You can't drag them over and get them to vote. It's still a physical act, and it's not a click the like button, and it's much easier to do. So I think there are ethical issues if you use if you change your messages. If you say, I'm going to tell you this, and I'll tell you something conflicting. That absolutely is, especially if one of them is not true. And I don't think there are ethical issues in getting more people to vote. I think the more people vote, the better it is for democracy. I think there's no ethical issue in giving them information that's more relevant to them. You all do that. If you've got a 60-year-old grandmother versus an 18-year-old high school student, you're not going to tell them the same thing. It doesn't make any sense, because they're not interested in the same things. So maybe it's just how I justify it, but I actually think that the more these data helps us do is really it helps us personalize at a scale that eventually causes more people to be aware of what's going on, and I think you can use that to really make them more part of the process.